Hello, my name is Cole Anderson, your host here on The Independent Pianist. And I've really been wanting to talk about Liszt's Années de Pèlerinage, or the Years of Pilgrimage, for a long time, as I really feel that these three books of pieces represent Liszt's greatest contributions to the Romantic character piece. And they deserve every bit as much attention as similar works by Chopin, Brahms, Schumann, and Mendelssohn. Unlike these other composers, Liszt was quite a bit more explicitly programmatic, and just about every piece in this collection has some kind of literary or pictorial link associated with it. The first volume, subtitled Suisse, was inspired by Liszt's experiences during the 4 years from 1835 to 1839. He spent these 4 years in Switzerland in the company of the Countess Marie d'Agoult, with whom Liszt had 3 children during that time: Blandine, Cosima, and Daniel. Liszt himself explained something of the connection that he felt between his music and the places that he visited in Switzerland in the foreword to the early version of this work, the album d'un voyageur, published in 1842. I have latterly traveled through many new countries, have seen many different places, and visited many a spot hallowed by history and poetry. I have felt that the varied aspects of nature and the different incidents associated with them did not pass before my eyes like meaningless pictures, but that they evoked profound emotions within my soul, that a vague but direct affinity was established betwixt them and myself, a real, though indefinable understanding, a sure but inexplicable means of communication, and I have tried to give musical utterance to some of my strongest sensations, some of my liveliest impressions. This first piece from the collection, The Chapel of William Tell, is indeed inspired by that famous William Tell of legend, who has been immortalized in so many incarnations. William Tell's story originally goes all the way back to the 14th century. In fact, the tradition places these events as having taken place in 1307, when the people of present-day Switzerland were still under the rule of the Austrian Duchy ruled by the Habsburgs. According to the most popular version of the legend, which was written in the 16th century by Egidius Tschudi, when Tell visited the town Altdorf with his son, he refused to bow to the hat of Albrecht Gessler, who was the ruler appointed by the Habsburgs. Gessler had set his hat on a flagpole and required the townsfolk to bow to it whenever passing. Tell was arrested because of his defiance, and Gessler devised this kind of cruel punishment where Tell could ostensibly win his freedom by shooting an apple off of his son's head, which of course he did. And when Gessler asked why Tell had taken 2 arrows from his quiver instead of 1, Tell said that if any harm had come to his son, he would have killed Gessler with the other on the spot. Gessler, enraged, ordered Tell to be arrested and imprisoned, but as Tell was being transported over Lake Lucerne to his imprisonment, a storm broke out, and the guards in the boat, fearful that they would drown, gave Tell his freedom temporarily so that he could save them, since he was also famous for his prowess with a boat. Instead, he steered the boat onto the rocks and leapt to safety. And to make a long story short, he ended up killing Gessler and leading the people of this region of Switzerland into an alliance with 2 other territories, which formed the old Swiss Confederacy, which was the forerunner of the modern Swiss nation, or so the legend goes. Whether or not this story really happened, or if Tell even existed, there is to this day a Catholic chapel built on Lake Lucerne at the spot where supposedly Tell escaped from his captors and reached the shore. The chapel has been rebuilt several times over the centuries, and the current one, which was built in 1879, actually postdates Liszt's time in Switzerland, but he would have visited a similar structure in his day, and it's easy to see how this visit, informed by his knowledge of Tell's legendary heroism in his fight for the Swiss native people, would have inspired Liszt's imagination and his sense of social justice. Liszt was, after all, very democratic in his persuasions. The album d'un voyageur even had a piece commemorating the silk workers' uprisings in Lyon that took place from 1831 to 1834. At any rate, Chapelle de Guillaume Tell is as strongly programmatic as anything that Liszt ever wrote. It even has a kind of cinematic quality to it, to my mind. In the imposing introduction, you can almost see the chapel coming into view over the water as the viewer remembers Tell's stirring tale. Then, after a breathless pause, we are transported back in time to the scene of Tell's legendary escape. We hear horn calls over the water and see a mighty storm building up to a tempest. Then Tell's triumphant escape and the image of his victory over his oppressors. Then gradually we are transported back to the present day with our spirits lifted by these memories of human courage and potentiality. In the album D'un Voyageur, there is an earlier version of this piece. As is common with Liszt's works, this piece went through revisions. It's practically unrecognizable in this earlier version. It really lacks the kind of dramatic clarity and economy which is really special about the last final version. And to me, it also seems very overwritten pianistically. One's kind of forced to the realization that Liszt's critics at this time had some grounds for complaining about the manner in which he used his admittedly enormous pianistic gifts. However, at the same time, comparing these two versions also just newly fills me with enormous respect for the tenacious self-criticism that Liszt showed in his revisions of his earlier works. He prunes away the excesses and clarifies the structure so expertly that we're left with this work of enormous vitality and vivid imagination. Personally, I think a work like this is much more representative of Liszt the composer than some flashier works from his virtuoso days, like the Grand Galop Chromatique or the Don Juan Fantasy, things like that. You may also notice some unconventional things in my approach to this music if you happen to be familiar with the piece already. In particular, I don't play the tremolo in the B section in exact 30 seconds, the way it's notated. In all the recordings I've ever heard, pianists always try to stick to a very precise 8 notes per beat in the tremolo. And to my mind, this is really not at all stylistic. I think we can surmise from Liszt's tremolando sempre marking, and also from the fermatas that he marks on the rests, that this section is meant to be totally free in the style of an operatic recitative, and that the tremolo, which is imitating a string tremolo like those frequently found in a Wagner opera, for example, should be realized as rapidly as possible, just like a string tremolo. It should make our hair stand on end. And most recordings I've heard haven't really succeeded in doing that for me. This kind of freedom is exactly the sort of thing which is described as being a very powerful quality in Liszt's own playing. He always knew when it was right to take a little bit of liberty in the spirit of the music. And it's the thing which I feel is most often missing in playing by contemporary pianists. I feel like we have this tendency nowadays, perhaps fostered by recording technology, to attempt note perfection and also a kind of slavish adherence to the printed notes and indications. And this oftentimes leads us astray so that we end up violating the spirit of the music in our attempt to play the notes as precisely as written. So anyway, feel free to comment below if you disagree or agree, or if you have just a different perspective or opinion on this issue. I'd be happy to discuss this idea more. But also, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and I'll catch you next time.